Hi everyone, this is Tanya with Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me for part 2 of my little Impressionism painting. Now if you missed part 1, I'm going to link that down below. But in part 1, we got a nice base coat on everything, and now we're going to continue on building up some form. So what I'm doing here is a little bit different of a technique than I did in part 1. In part 1, you saw me color right on this watercolor canvas. And in part 2, I have a little palette here, and this is just the back. If you've not seen my videos before, this is just the back of a little cutting board that was a free gift from a Walmart grocery pickup, but it has a nice texture on the back. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking these Neocolor IIs and coloring little spots of color right on this mat. Then I'm going to come back and paint straight in this mat. And what this does is it allows me to get a concentrated color. I can have it as thin as I want or as thick as I want, and that's important because from this point on, these Neocolor IIs are going to act more like gouache. And if you've never painted with gouache, you usually start with a thin layer on bottom, and it kind of depends on the technique you're using, but a thin layer on bottom, and in order to paint back on top of it to keep it from activating, because anytime you add water to it, and the same thing with these Neocolor IIs that are on watercolor canvas. If I put water on just the watercolor canvas here with the Neo 2 color down that I already have, it's going to activate that and lift it off. So in order for that not to happen, I'm going to have a little bit thicker of a paint that I'm putting on top. So I'm going to have to treat these like gouache, and you'll see me go back and forth because it takes me a minute on some of these. I go, oh yeah, because in the sky I need it a little bit thinner, but I'll be painting along and down in the trees and I'll go, oh yeah, this needs to be a bit thicker. So you'll see me hit my cloth over on the left hand side just to get the extra water out of my brush. And as we get down to the trees, in the sky I don't really mind if I'm pulling up a little bit of color because it was one of those snowy, cloudy type days, gray sky, and I want a little bit of texture there. So if I pull some up, that's okay. It's giving me the effect of clouds. But as we're coming down to the trees, what I'm doing on this is I'm wanting to build up some shape. I don't want to take off too much color underneath, but if I take it off, that's okay. And you can tell where my brush hits. The color is more concentrated on the tip, and you can tell because the point of where it is hitting, that's where the color is. And as it's coming down, as it's getting closer to that metal barrel there where there is more water in the brush, then it's pulling up a little bit of color. But again, that's okay. All I need to do right now is build up form. I'm adding in some more darks to the piece so that I can get some form and then come back in and add some thicker color on top and do all the finishing touches on it. And I don't want to do too much painting on this because remember, it's an Impressionist painting. It's going to be a loose painting. I didn't draw anything out. This was all just freehand painting on here. I'm using the reference just as a reference. I'm not trying to get it exact, so it's going to remain loose. And for me, being a realist painter, that's something I have to remind myself of through this entire process. So what you're seeing here, building up the color, you can see I'm coming back over some of the same areas. And if you watch part 1, I told you this needs to dry before you paint back over it. I am coming back with a few more colors on top while it's still wet. I'm able to do that because my paint is thicker. Now, if my paint was thin, you're going to see me pulling it up. If I have too much water in my brush, I'm going to pull it up. And you'll see when I hit an area too hard with too much water, I'm going to pull it up right back to that canvas. But again, it's okay because this is just the second layer. I'm only worried about getting in some of the darks that are in the piece just to make it a little easier when I put that final coat on top so that I can do my final layer. This is going to make that a little bit easier because I don't need all of these little points that are down in the piece. But this is what's making it Impressionism for me because an Impressionist painter, they paint with little dots of color. So my brush is making the same kind of movement that an Impressionist painter would do. However, when I come back in part 3, we're going to be smoothing some of this area out. This is just a way to get on the color and to pile it on a little more thickly on there. Is thickly a word? I don't know, but we're gonna make it one here. We'll add Webster to add it on in for us, but we're gonna add some thicker layers of color in here, and that's how I'm doing it, with the little dabs and making certain I have a lot of paint on my brush and not as much water. So that's allowing me to come back on some of these wet areas and keep painting on top. And I'm going to continue this process all the way down, and then we're going to have to let it dry so that I can come back and do the final layers on top. Just keep in mind, this is kind of like gouache. If you're going to try this on a watercolor canvas, this is like gouache. It's not going to be like this if you're working on paper. It's not going to lift up like this is doing on here. It's a little bit different on paper, but when you're working on here, just keep in mind, it's kind of like working with gouache. This little section of trees that's a little more in the foreground, but still it's more of our midground here. It's not our background or our foreground. It's still more of our midground. This was a very light area, and while I have thicker paint than what I did when I put the first layer down in video 1, I have less paint on my brush than the trees in the background that I just painted, because it's okay with me if this kind of mixes in with the paint on the bottom and lifts it up some, because these trees had a lot of snow on them and they were a very light contrast to the back. So I'm not being quite as careful here, because I know this is an area I'm going to be changing some. I can actually see some tree trunks in here and some branches in here, and there is even some area where you can see all the way through between these two clumps of trees, the ones I just painted in the background, and then these, there is like a little space of ground there where there's no trees. You can see I'm getting some extra water off my brush there. But that I'm going to include in the final video. So if it's pulling up a little paint in some areas, that's okay with me, because I know I'm going to have to come back and lift a little paint anyway so that I can get that area in. The little bush that's right in the front in the lower left-hand side, we're going to be adding some more colors into that. I wasn't really happy with the colors I had in there, so you're going to see me add a little more color in, and then when I come back in the third video, we'll put more on top of that, and that just kind of gets it the shade that I need it to be. Just a few more paint strokes, and then we will be finished with this little clump of trees in the front. And we'll move on and finish this up in part 3. I do hope you'll join me for part 3. I appreciate your being here. If you are new to the channel, welcome. YouTube has started something that they call courses. So all of these little videos, instructional videos on Caran and just regular watercolor and Derwent Graphitint and ink tints. I have little courses on all of those. You can find those by going to my channel and kind of scrolling over to the right, and you'll see something called courses. Click on that and you'll find all of these videos there. Thank you again for being here. I hope you found something that was valuable. If so, could you give me a hype on the channel and subscribe, or give me a like, or ring the notification bell? I appreciate you so much. I hope you'll join me for the ones coming up. But until then, my friends, I'll see you in the next one.